Hi, I'm Petru Popescu, and welcome back to my course on Spring Boot. In this course, we'll be looking at request interceptors. But before that, we need to understand how Spring handles an HTTP request once it arrives in our application. We have our request coming here, which goes to a dispatcher servlet. This dispatcher servlet redirects the request to a handler mapping in order to determine the controller. After that, it goes to a handler adapter, which redirects the request to a handler chain. This handler chain consists of multiple components, including a filter chain, which can reject your request if certain conditions are not met, to our request interceptors, and to our controllers. From our controller, we do our business logic, and after that, we process a response. We go to our model and set the processing result, and after that, the result goes back to the handler chain through our request interceptors, back to our filter chain, and goes eventually back to the handler adapter. From there, it goes to the dispatcher servlet, which using a view resolver determines what is the appropriate view for returning the result. This can be either a JSON response or an actual HTTP page. And after that, it goes to our view, which returns an HTTP response back to the user. It may seem quite complex. However, if you look closely, only certain information, only certain components are handled by the developer. The rest are handled by Spring. We have the filter chain, which is handled by Spring. However, developers can create their own filters. Request interceptors, which are optional. Our controllers, obviously, we need to be able to handle the request. And the model, we have predefined models. However, we can build our own models. For example, our HTTP pages using Thymeleaf. And obviously, the business logic. And the model and the view are again developed partially by Spring and partially by the developer. The entire flow is very straightforward, and Spring knows how to do things in the exact order. All we have to do is know where we need to inject and when we need to inject our components. Normally, we don't need to create any of our filters. Most probably, only in certain situations we need to implement our request interceptors. The only thing that we need to do for most applications is developing the business logic and the controllers, and maybe the views and the model. Now that we know how Spring handles a request, let's try to create our first interceptor. For this, we need to create a new class. Let's name it myInterceptor. And that interceptor must implement this interface, Handler Interceptor. Interceptors must implement this interface in order to be able to properly handle a request. Handler Interceptor interface has three methods which we need to implement. You can implement only one or two or all three of them depending on your needs. There is a pre-handle which redirects the request here before it is handled by the controller. We have a post handle, and the response and the request arrive here after they exit the controller, but before being sent to the client or to the front end. And finally, after completion, which is executed after the response is sent fully back to the caller, being it a browser or another microservice. I added, using SLF4J, a log message for each of the three methods. This way, it will be very easy for us to identify when the request reaches this point. If we run our application now, it is currently compiling, and after that, we can send a request, and let's see if we have everything printed in the console. As you can see, we have complete initialization. However, even though we sent a simple request, nothing gets printed in the console. Why is this? In order to activate our interceptor, we must create a configuration and add our interceptor to the registry. I created a simple configuration class, and this is done using the add configuration annotation, and it implements WebMDC configurer. After that, I auto-wired my interceptor, and I have overwritten the add interceptor method. This method accepts the interceptor registry as an input parameter. And after that, I add my interceptor to the registry and specify for which endpoints. I added /*, which indicates that it is active for all endpoints. However, you can specify only certain endpoints, being them static or dynamic using wildcards. Now, let's rerun our application with this configuration active. It is currently compiling. Let's clear our console and send the request again. Now, if we go back, we see that we have all three methods printed properly. We reached our first method from the interceptor, which logs we received the request. After the request was handled by the controller, we reach the second method, we finish processing the request, and finally sending the result finished. Obviously, the interceptor can do a lot more things. This is only a simple example. However, because it is a bin, it is annotated with add component, it means we can inject bins into it. This means that we can do many useful things. For example, we can manipulate the request or the response prior to it being sent to the controller or back to the front end. And we can store information for use later on. For example, I use interceptors to store in the thread context a unique ID so that all logs that arrive in the console or in the file, depending on how you log information, all logs have a unique identifier for that request. This makes it very easy in debugging or in investigating problems on your application once it is released. That's all for now. I hope this lesson will be very useful for you. I know it is rather short, but request interceptors are very easy to create and very easy to register in your Spring application.